Welcome everybody watching, listening. We have a amazing guest here today, one of the legends of the sport, Steve Mooney, otherwise known as Moons. You'll need to tell me about that. And I want to make sure I do this intro justice because um, I think we have a tendency in Ultimate sometimes to maybe forget about the past or not necessarily spend much time thinking about it, let's just say. So I want to do a proper introduction, and Steve, you can uh, correct me or whatnot. But Steve is, just to give everybody an idea of who you are, Steve is a Hall of Famer. You were inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2006. And I'm just going to read your bio because I think it helps give perspective to people watching and listening today that you're going to have a lot of amazing insight and things to say because of who you are and your experience in the sport. So I'm going to read your bio from the Hall of Fame Ultimate Hall. Steve Mooney, as one of the top players in the game and leader of one of the best teams in Ultimate for 20 years, is the quintessential Hall of Famer. His dominating play and presence led Boston to 7 UPA, USA Ultimate Club, and 2 World Championships, and winning the Spirit of the Game team awards at both World Championships. In addition to Steve's outstanding on-field contributions, it was his preparation that set him apart. From managing the team makeup, organizing training, running practice, Moons was the one to go to when everything was on the line. That checks out. I'll tell you in a minute. His ability to address 1,000 details, many psychological, in the months preceding the critical play of the crucial game is what made him so great. That he is the one that players look for in that situation is icing. So hopefully for those listening, get an idea of who Steve actually is. Steve, this is the first time we've met. It is a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Kurt. It's great to be here. And let me just clarify something. I would have been in this sport a lot less time had we won again sooner. But because we went 12 years between the first national championship and the second national championship, I was like, I just got to stay in. And then once we won and we kept winning, I was like, well, I can't really leave in the middle of the run. So this would have been a 10-year career had I just finished the job.
That is actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because looking at your bio, super impressive. You have 7 US club championships, 2 world championships. But what's really unique, not only the number, but that aside for a second, because that's impressive in and of itself. But your first championship was in 1982 with the Rude Boys. You won again in 84. And then there is a 11-year gap between the next one. And then you won your last one in 1999. So literally that's a 17-year gap that you have between national championship. That is insane. That is like actually insane.
Well, one of the things that I found out when I was doing a little research about that gap, so national championship in 82, the Rude Boys, world championship in 83, and then not another national championship until 94. Coincidentally, George Foreman is the exact same span. And the only difference between me and George Foreman, aside from I can't box and I'm white and he's black, is he's got a grill and I don't. But he had that same span of, making it and then having to wait. And there was a big difference between, the team that we played with in 82. We won with only man. We didn't play zone. We didn't have plays. We didn't have names on our shirts. We ripped the sleeves off. I mean, we were at the beginning of the sport, 10 years in, 82, 10, 12 years into the sport. And then you go to 94 and it's a team and you got offense and defense and plays and all this different stuff. I mean, when you look back at it, it was like 2 different sports.
Yeah. I can only imagine. So I want to get into that and ask you about that, but I want to continue to just set this up for people listening. So I talked to, do you know the name Kurt Dollenberg?
Yep.
So he coached me when I was in college. We've remained in touch, and I called him and I said, "Hey, I'm interviewing Steve Mooney on my podcast." And he goes, "What? You're interviewing Steve Mooney?" And he went off on, well, he can talk, and he went off on probably 20, 30 minutes on like what a legend you were. And he literally said, he goes, Steve was the best player of my generation. He was like hands down. And he said 80% of the people in his generation all said Steve was the best player. The other one being Kenny Dobbins, who I think, which I want to ask you about too, is probably the reason for the big gap in championships, because I know it was on New York, New York. But he said that you could do it all. You can't necessarily tell by this video, but are you 6'6", and are you a lefty, and
I
you're a
am.
handler?
I am all of the above. I like to say that I'm 2 meters tall. The Europeans know what I'm talking about. The Americans are like, what is he talking about? I
Struggling.
am left-handed. This was before the days of people being ambidextrous as they are now. And Kurt is awesome. Love him and the teams, when we played against them in Florida. We had some great battles. So I have fond memories of Kurt.
He said one of his favorite memories was when they had established their Florida combo team, him and like Miami and Gainesville, and they went up to your tournament, and I think you were preparing for Worlds, and I think he said it was late 90s. I don't know if it was 99, but he said that they beat you in the finals as you're preparing for Worlds, and he said that you came over to them and talked with him and Steve Fowler and a few others and said, I just want to let you guys know that nobody has beaten us on our home turf before. And I don't, maybe you can explain that if nobody had beaten you, but he walked away and said, oh my gosh, that was Steve. Like they kind of had the googly eyes in a sense because you were that kind of player to them. Like, wow, Steve Mooney just came over and talked to us like that. And just again, for people listening, that's a weird thing in Ultimate to have that. But for him, who's been in the sport from the 80s, early 80s to 2020, basically, to say that, I was like, wow, okay, Steve must have been really like big time and like famous in that sense. So do you remember that interaction?
I do. I do remember that game and them winning. And they had some of the best players in the game. We had a deeper team. That day, though, they were better, and there was nothing else to say but congratulations. But we had some great battles over the years, and he was always incredibly generous. And I think both teams were always very spirited, always all about fair play, which was so important. And the Rude Boys really tried to embrace that. So I do remember that. I do hate to lose. So even when I'm over there saying congratulations, it's painful. Another reason I lasted as long as I did in the sport is that competitiveness, and certainly Kurt and his team had that same fire. I think finally, after the age of 60, you start to relax a little and realize that it's not all about winning, Steve. It's about playing, and it's about just having the opportunity to be on the team. But when you're 25 and 28 and you're vying for national world championships, sometimes you lose sight of that. So I was glad on that day that I could take a deep breath and congratulate them.
So how old were you when you won your first championship? And then how old were you when you won your last, like stopped playing open?
Right. So 82, I would have been 24. And then 99, I am 40 something, 41. So, that's a pretty big span of time. And then there were, after that, you play a little bit of Masters, and then your hamstrings tighten up to the point where getting open is really, really hard, which may be something that you're facing now. I don't know how old you are,
I'm
but it,
39. I'm
yeah,
39.
it just
I think
they
I've called it. Yeah.
they start to, and you really have to work harder. What actually knocked me out of the game as much as the Condors beating us in 2000 was plyometrics. Like, we got the guy Brian Dew from the Celtics. He was their trainer, and he joins our team in '99 or 2000. And all of a sudden, the workouts turn into these explosive plyometric. And I'm injured like before we even get to the first tournament. I'm like, Brian, what are you doing to us? Now the young players like, yeah, this is great. We're going to have more vertical, we're faster, explosive. Like, I was like, I don't even think I can do his workouts. So,
All right. Oh my gosh, that's too funny. Just imagine myself. Yeah, I don't think I would do plyometrics right now. I mean, I would, I guess, but I think at the level that is needed to compete at the highest level and consistently. I mean, when I was 5+ years ago, I was doing plyos twice a week, weights twice a week, 2 track workouts, twice a week. Like, I did a lot, but if I tried to do that now, there's no way
yeah.
my body
I
wouldn't be
mean,
able to handle that. I'd just get injured.
right. One of the things that my career span was innovation and training. I think, like you, we played soccer in college, and so I understood what endurance was about from playing soccer. I understood what sprinting and training to sprint was about. But it wasn't until I was on the Rude Boys that I was introduced to intervals. Like, oh, that was the
Mm.
next level. So we're now going to run intervals in order to basically make our heart rate and our VO2 max improve. And then over time, we started to understand strength building. And then at the end, in comes Brian and plyometrics and explosiveness. So that was kind of interesting to move with the way that training changed. And when I saw Bo Kittredge and what he did to get in shape, I thought, well, that's like on a whole nother level of combining both strength building and intervals. And there's no surprise that he dominated for that reason.
Yeah. I would it be fair to say then? I mean, I don't know the history of fitness, kind of how that evolution, but I would say even in my day, I've learned so like the things that I did when I was younger. If I would did the things I did when I was in my 30s, early 30s, I would have had more longevity and wouldn't have been injured for random parts of the season because things as simple as rolling on a ball to kind of roll out a knot in your hamstring, right? When I was 24, thought if I had a little tink, I was like, oh, I don't know if I should play this game or this tournament or whatever, sit out. And really, all I needed was kind of like a foam roller or a ball to kind of loosen the tension. So just that's one example, I think, of many. But what was the evolution of your kind of fitness? Like, so you played soccer in college. Like, did you do a kind
That's
of a lot of training for it? Like, what did that look like?
I think the big thing for me was over time doing less and knowing that didn't mean I wouldn't be able to perform. So when you're 24, you think it's all about how much you train. We got to work out 6 days a week. We got to go to 13 tournaments in a row in the fall. We got to run all these sprints, and you can. You're 24. Well, then slowly but surely you realize, as you just pointed out, that you're getting hurt. And so we're not going to go to all those tournaments. We're not going to train 6 days a week. We're going to be smart about track workouts on one night, strategy session, scrimmaging. We're just going to be smarter about how hard we work and about when we taper. So I think it was actually this evolution of, and now at my advanced age of 29, I know that I can get a workout in 15 minutes. I know that I can keep my fitness in these really short periods of time, whereas before I never thought that was possible. So that's probably the biggest evolution for me. I always got a
So,
kick out of one guy. So you remember in the days you got to stretch those hamstrings. Of course, now we're like, well, stretching is debatable. I remember this
right.
one guy on our team on dog, Jordan. He would show up, jog around the field once, and go in the game and never get hurt. And I thought, how is that possible? And what he was actually doing is just making sure his muscles were warmed up. And that was the aha. They weren't stretched, but they were warmed up. And it took me way too long to figure out that that was the right way to do it.
It makes me think of I saw an interview of Deion Sanders, and he kind of recalled his time at the combine, and he talked about how he's like, I'm really fast. Who are the fastest animals? He talked about a cheetah. He's like, cheetahs don't warm up. So why do I need to warm up? He's like, I just
It,
went out there and just sprint. Like cheetahs don't do it, so why am I gonna do it? There's
well,
some truth to that. I mean, there's a
I
little bit of truth to that, you know?
I know. I work with a guy now, Brent Steep, and his philosophy is some different moves and some different ways to warm up before you hit the field, and it's been effective. So I'm a convert.
So, Steve, I think people would want to know from you, especially who aren't familiar with your generation, but even myself included, I would love to hear. But what made you a legend? What made you, and I'm not asking you to tell me who's the best player or whatnot, but you can if you want. But what made you great? What was specific about your level of play that really was defining? Because yeah, you had success at 24 years old with the Rude Boy all the way up until your 40s. Like, so there, what was it about your game that was unique?
Well, there was two things that come to mind. One you're going to relate to because I remember watching you win, and that's field sense. And even though I was 2 meters tall, 6'6.5", and everybody said, "Why aren't you cutting long?" I just had a sixth sense around the disc, and that was natural to me. And so controlling play, controlling flow, throwing that pass, but not that one, that was my strength. And I had good hands, so for the most part, caught if it was near me. We used to play this game. We called it, I don't remember, we might have called it dog. Essentially, if you could touch it, you could catch it. And so we would purposely throw perfectly bad throws to each other and then try to catch them. So you're really training for that reason, that you're the guy that isn't going to kind of turn it over. And so that was sort of the first thing, is being in the field of play, playing to space, throwing to space. That's also soccer. Love that about the disc. Love that about soccer. And then the second thing is I listen well. And what I didn't realize when I was 24 is how much the sport was training me for business, and made it possible for me later to be a managing director, because you got all these people in the huddle. Everybody thinks they know what the next play should be. And everybody's right. You just have to pick one, and then everybody has to do the one. So I was good at listening to, here come these ideas, like, oh, that'll work. Let's do that, and then get everybody on board. So I think sort of a combination of wanting to be a quarterback, so to speak, on the field, and then being able to listen and not necessarily always having the answer, but being able to say, Billy, that let's do that, and really facilitating those huddles.
Interesting. I was honestly expecting more of like a physical um answer about how you were fast or tall, you could break the mark, or would get layout Ds because you were just jump higher and quicker. But that's a great answer because you mentioned about watching me play. I never thought that I was always, I was fast, I could jump high, I was a great thrower. I think I was good at everything, but I don't know, there's always probably somebody that was faster than me on the field, right? Or somebody that could maybe had a better vertical, but those don't necessarily make you a good player. It's a lot of the intangibles, kind of the decision making, field sense, awareness, and the latter one you described was interesting because so that's you as a team leader also, right? Not just as
Yeah,
a player.
yeah. The one thing I used to say about play is, it's not who's fastest in the first game; it's who's fastest in the last game.
Hmm.
And I was not fastest in the first game. I mean, people were simply, Jim Paranella is incredibly fast, but I had incredible endurance. And so when that last game came around, I was surprisingly open. And my JV coach in college, his name was Dan Long. and he says, Mooney, when I see you run alone, you look really slow. But when I see you run next to somebody else, you're keeping right up. And so it was sort of like this aha moment of, like you said, it's not that you're going to win the 40 in the combine, but in that last game, when the disc is up, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
You're in shape,
Yeah.
you have good field sense, and you got your body in front of the other guy who might think he's faster. So that was maybe my particular strength.
I think I, this is my perception. I don't know if this is fact, but I think that a lot of people are always, when they think about, oh, I'm going to get in really good shape, like they're focusing on sprinting and jumping and those types of things. Not that they're not focusing on endurance, but I don't think there's enough important place on that within Ultimate, because you're right. We don't play, I mean, unless you're in the UFA, but even then the points are quick. It is a long game, but you play in a tournament, right? So you got pool play and then you got quarters, finals, right? So just to get to the finals of the national championship, world championship, it's 3-4 day tournament, week-long tournament. You need endurance. And I've always trained that way, because it's very clear that, what good is it if you can sprint faster than the other person if you're out of breath, right? And you see
And
that a lot.
you came out of soccer, so it was implicit
I
in
didn't play
soccer.
soccer. I didn't play soccer. No, I did play when I was younger. I played all
Okay,
different types of sports, but um, I did
but
play soccer, but I was
so-
not to
so-
your level.
soccer is endurance, and the Rude Boys. We only had 17 at nationals, 17 players at nationals in 1982, and we didn't come out of the game. We played offense, we played defense. We just sort of stayed in, and then maybe we'd come out. There wasn't that same kind of, here comes the O line, D line, and we were playing only man. I think one of the reasons that we didn't have prolonged success is that we were slow to figure out, oh, okay, you know what, we need more players. We just need a deeper team in order to keep up, because there are so many tournaments and so many games within a tournament. And then later, when you have 26, 27 players on dog, it means that, if you establish yourself as one of the leaders, then everybody's playing during pool play. You don't have to play every point like you did in 1982. You have something left at the end of the tournament. That was just sort of a development of the sport.
It makes me think of my college days, because we won college nationals in 2006, and we had 17 players on a roster, and we basically played like every point. A lot of us didn't come off the field, especially in the bigger games, but I don't know if you can do that anymore in college, but we trained like Marines because that was our plan, and we knew we didn't have a lot of players, so we had to do that. And we always felt like that was what would put us in the best position to win, is just being out there on the field. And then, you know, at least 15 years ago, I don't know. No, hold on. No, almost 19, closer to 20 years ago when I was in college, if you played hard defense, they would give you it to give you the disc sometimes, right? And I think the game's got a little better in college, but yeah. So what was
There
it
was
like? Oh, go ahead.
there was one that speaks to small numbers. There was one tournament that reestablished our dominance, and it's been written about a little bit, but I wanted to talk about it. It was a tournament in Philadelphia in 1993, I think, and we had 9 going in, nine players. One got hurt in warm up, so now you have 8, and one of them was somebody we didn't know quite as well as the other 7. And okay, so we're in the first huddle, and it's not like a huge tournament. Not all the players there. I got it, but still, we basically have 8 guys, 7 who know each other. And I say, all right, the only way we can win this game and this tournament is if we don't run a lot. So here's what we're gonna do: we're gonna throw it to Cork every goal in the first game, and they're gonna figure it out. But it isn't gonna matter. We know we're going to Cork, and it's going to make us more determined. Second game, Jim, you do it. Third, Steve, and we'll go through the whole team, and each one of us will have a shot. And then defensively, we're going to throw the disc downfield on the pole, out of
You
bounds.
mean you would just like huck it to that guy? Like you would
Yeah,
just
no, you'd
say, all
work it
right, every
upfield.
point you're going deep.
You'd work it upfield, or you'd huck it, but you knew it was Cork. Cork was going to score. And then defensively, the important thing here is we're going to set up what we call junk D. And if in the first two passes we get the block, great. If they get ahead of us, walk back. Don't chase them. Like literally let them score. I remember Jordan's like, Moons, I can't believe you're letting him score. Why aren't we trying? It's like, we can't survive with this few guys. So put the junk D on, get a shot at the block. And if you get the block, we're going to that one guy. And guess what? We won the tournament. And it established two things: that if you're super determined and purposeful and everybody knows what's happening, it'll work. That was the first thing. Duh. And the second thing is that on defense, get them thinking, overthinking, get a strike, and then let it happen. Sort of just don't chase them all day. And those two things really establish that next 6-year run.
So, I mean, it makes me think of Japan in 2016. I think they did it in 2024 too, but a world where they just throw the pull and they let us get to like 2/3 of the way half field, and then they actually started playing defense because they wanted to take away the huck. You
Right.
guys did it on an extreme level of just, if you do a junk and you don't get it in the first couple of passes, just let them buy you. I mean, that probably like stings the pride a little bit for a second, but then once you realize like, wait, we're still in this game at the end, assuming you guys scored efficiently and maybe you got one or two, like you're winning. So the strategies work.
And it also spoke to one of the things that I loved about joining the sport early is that you could innovate, and there were no adults. We were the adults, and you're 24, 25, 26. You're inventing new rules. You're innovating. You're coming up with creative names for the team. You're building, the tournaments. You're walking the fields. I mean, that we take for granted just how great that was for us in terms of what we would then need in our lives, whether it was a family, whether it was a business. We had just done all this, as part of the sport. It got a little bit less, as we got towards, the end, it got a little more formal, but we were still the adults on the field. Now we're in our 30s and we're still able to innovate. And what it makes me, think about now is my big aha for the sport came this summer at the Olympics when I watched the women's rugby 7. Now, I hadn't really followed rugby, and I kind of knew how it was played. And then I watched that, and I thought, whoa, in 2 days, they created a tournament with super short half times and really, really low scoring, but gave underdogs a chance to win and made it incredibly exciting. And the sport has exploded. That level of innovation, we are not as comfortable with. And I thought, we just watched a sport's going to explode off of what just happened. And now Maher has got more followers than any other rugby player in history coming off of that, that game and that tournament. So I love the innovations that we could do. I'd love to see more innovation, in right now in order to push this game forward.
So let's talk about that. I have so many questions to ask you, but so since we're on that topic, let's talk about that. So what was it like? One, how did you find the sport? Because I mean, you won the club championship in '82. I don't know when the first one started, but I think Curto had mentioned there's only 8 teams at nationals, perhaps at that point. But how did you find the sport just and get into it? Because you mentioned playing college soccer. So I imagine it was sometime during there or after that, because, now kids are starting a lot earlier. And I mean, I found it at 17. Sounds like you found it probably even later.
Yeah, I
And
found
and
it
then what drew
probably.
you to the sport? What drew you in?
Yeah, I found it at probably 20, towards the end of college. I went to Wesleyan, Nick Donahue used to try to get me to play. It's like, Steve, you got to come out. Like, I don't want to play. And he was relentless. And then I went to California and I played with the Circus up on Strawberry Flats, which is above Berkeley. And that was a breakthrough summer to play with those guys and Harvey and Joe Edo and some others. And they all said, "Oh, you got to come to Worlds." And I'm going into my senior year. I was like, "I can't come to Worlds. I got to go to preseason soccer." I'm like, "No, you got to come to Worlds." Like, but by then it's like, oh, this sport is really fun. It can be really competitive. Nick got me out to play on the team at Wesleyan called Niche Factor, whose name is still the name of the team, which is awesome. So I played 1 or 2 seasons in the spring because the fall was soccer. And then when I moved to Boston, we created the Rude Boys. So that was by the time I graduated, age 22.
Okay, so you did play in college then. Okay, so it was like a college club
It was a
sport back
college
then.
team, and we were okay. You know, the Heifers were the New York team. They would beat us regularly. We played against the Dukes, and we were getting better. And a couple of us went to Boston. Nick, myself, Chris High, three of us, David Garfield, who's Nietzsche, all moved up to Boston and were part of the building of the Rude Boys, a bunch of guys from Williams. And at the time, some of the history that you were talking about, Boston Aerodisc had lost in 1980, but they were great. Obviously, they were a finalist at Nationals. Only 5 teams advanced at that point. 81, only 5 teams advanced, so 1 from each region. And by then, we were having a battle with a team in Boston called the Hostages, which is epic because we play them pretty much every weekend, all fall long. And then in
Wow.
82, we were able to break through, beat them, and have a really good run at Nationals.
So when you picked up the sport, I mean, you're a college athlete, but were you good right away, or were you kind of like figuring it out? Like what was your skill level and how quickly did it get to where, well, hey, Moons is pretty good?
I was bad, and Chris High said, quote, "Man, he really can't throw, but he's tall and he's fast. So let's stay with him." But, the game takes some time to figure out. The 2-finger, the backhand, they had, Chris High is a great player and loved to huck it. So he's like, "I think I can work with this guy."
Right.
It's that kind of thing.
So you picked it up 1982 and then, or well, 80, but what then got you to, like, how did you guys get from being the Wesleyan kids starting at Boston kind of club team, battling it out with the Hostages to winning nationals? Well, how did that kind of come about? Did you guys pick up players? Did you just kind of evolve and get better?
We took a bunch of players from Aerodisc and then some other graduates from Williams. I knew 1 or 2 of the guys there through a mutual friend, and we went to Mars, Pennsylvania, the summer of I think it was 81, and that was sort of our first tournament. And we were able to play there and do well, and realize, oh, there's something here. We loved our black shirts with our checkerboard. Joel created this great logo, and spirit. And we listened to the specials and the English beat, and we had women on the team in the summer, and we played every night at MIT or Harvard pickup. It was what you did. You're
Wow, every
24
night.
or 25.
Wow.
You're just like, this is the best thing ever, is being a part
Wow.
of this community. And then literally in the fall of 1981 and 1982, there were 12 or 13 tournaments between Labor Day and Thanksgiving. Remember, Nationals were on Thanksgiving, and you played in all of them. And
That's like every weekend.
that was every weekend. And you couldn't do that when you're 35, but you could do that when you're in your 20s.
I
It was like
can't
a
imagine
huge
playing
party.
that.
It was great. You get in the van, you drive. One of the funny things is when we would go to Mars, we'd rent a Ford rent-a-van, and we'd take the odometer out so that didn't have to pay mileage. And then you'd bring the thing back and it'd have mud all over it, and you'd put the odometer back in, and it'd be like 60 miles. And the guy's like, kind of dirty for 60 miles. Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
we went to the Cape.
Yeah.
Because you're
Oh man.
25.
Yeah, taking the odometer out. Wow. That's like so you know, I can't even imagine doing that today. First of all, I don't even know how we could figure that out because they're all digital now, but you
Right.
certainly couldn't pull that out.
Right. Exactly. One of the things that led to our championship, I think in '82, was what we called 6 a.m. practice. We always just felt like, let's just do more than anybody else is doing. Of course, we had no idea what anybody else was doing, but as long as we thought we were doing more than everybody else,
That's
you
what
had the
matters.
advantage. And so we went out at 6 o'clock in the morning, a couple times a week, played what we call die factor to run some sprints, just to say, hey, nobody, and it's 2 a day, 6 a.m. And then there might be practice in the evening as well. So that kind of established a different level of training. And then one of the guys on the team, Finley Waugh, he brought intervals. Like, let me show you what that looks like. Here's a 400. You got to run in a certain time. Then you take a break. You do another 400. So those two things really made us feel like nobody could keep up with us.
Funny you bring up intervals because that's what our coach Curto brought to us in college. I mean, we didn't really know what that was. I mean, I did because I ran track and cross country in high school, so I knew what that was. But now that we were playing Ultimate, I didn't know about getting the whole team on it. And like, but Ultimate's different. Why do I need to do that? I'm not running 5Ks or 10Ks. And that, I think, was one of the huge reasons that it prepared us physically, but also mentally, because
Right.
that's a huge part of the game that you don't think about. But at the end of a tournament, in the championship, when everybody's tired and you're fatigued and you want to just kind of lob up a huck because you don't want to run anymore or whatever, you remember those track workouts, those interval training, the training that you did, and you're like, okay, no, I can gut this out. I got one more in me. I got one more in me, a few more cuts. And that, I think, was a huge foundational component of why we won that first championship.
Yeah, I totally can relate to that. And we were still doing intervals. Uh, Death or Glory, certainly did intervals, and we were more disciplined about it. More of us did it with the Rude Boys. A few of us did the intervals, not the whole team. And then later, the whole team would do a track workout. You'd show up on a Tuesday, and you'd have your 3 sets that you'd built out, and you'd all do it. And that was, as hard as those were, I really enjoyed those.
It's good team bonding. Like in the, you're just burning your lungs, burning your heart, just like running those. It is, but it's also you see your other teammates doing it as well, right? So like, hey, everybody's putting in the work. So it just helps, I think, from a camaraderie perspective to get everybody,
We
seeing
used
each other do it.
we used to run until John Barr threw up. That was sort of like, then you knew, all right, we're gonna
You
win.
did good.
We just made him toss.
So just to get back to it, when you were young, like in those early days of Root Boys, you were playing every night. You were playing Frisbee every night of the
We were those first couple years. You just loved getting out there, and I have to just reiterate, it's part of your social life. You're in
Yeah.
Boston, you've just graduated from college, you're trying to meet people, and they're all going to show up and play. And that was, in the summers, it was pickup, and then in the fall, it was your team, sort of spring, summer. And then the other beautiful thing about Boston, which nobody understands unless they live here, is, and then you don't play in the winter. It's so great. You like do some other stuff, play basketball, go skiing, whatever. Along comes Fools, and you have this newfound enthusiasm for the sport. You haven't been doing it for 365 days. And we
Right.
drive down to Fools, and it was very relaxed. Obviously, you still did well, but it wasn't the same pressure, and so you get to start all over again. So that I really appreciated.
So walk us through, you won in 82 and 84, and then you have a 11-year before winning again. How did that? Why did that happen? How did that happen?
So, and technically, just to make sure, 82 national champs, 83 world champs. We don't win in 84. Our next national champ is 94. The first 4 or 5 years in that gap, a
So then
series of teams.
the Ultimate Hall website has it incorrect then, because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I'm going off of. Thank you
I'll
for the
get in there.
clarification.
The first few years after, you got Windy City wins, the Tunas, St. Louis Tunas win, San Francisco. So a few different teams win as New York is getting better. And we're battling with New York because they're in our region. And then they have their breakthrough and go on to their 5-year run. And there's nothing to make you better than almost winning, which is what we were doing for a long time. And you're just working harder, trying to figure things out, adding people to the team. One of the big things that happened was when Jim Paranella joined the team, he brought
Which was when?
he was with Earth Atomizer, and then right around 94, I think it was 93 or 94. Part of what he brings is, he's like, others had been saying it, but he said it in a way that we heard it. It's like the value of the disc. It's a little bit like reading the book, Billy Ball, the value of getting on base and how that changed baseball. When we finally really understood the consequence of a turnover. And what's going to be ironic is when I tell you the sport needs more turnovers to grow, but in order to win in 1994, we had to minimize our turnovers and go for, high percentage passing. And, and some of what I told you about being more deliberate about who we're throwing to, running a 4-person play off the pull. New York had mastered that. That was their, that they were the best in class at here comes the pull. It's going to go from Weiss to, to somebody to Cribber to Dobbins. I mean, they just ran it over and over again. Blau was in that mix. Pat King was in the mix, and they were impossible to stop. So long story short, that disciplined approach, Jim really hammered home. And the other thing that happened is the internet. And I credit the internet for part of our success because it meant that that what was said in the huddle wasn't the only thing that was being said. Whereas the Rude Boys, you said it in the huddle, and then you all went and your phones were hanging on the wall. There were no cell phones. So there was no additional conversation. I could write letters to each other in 1982. But in 1994, the internet comes along, Facebook, and now if somebody can write out what they're thinking in between practice, you're in a whole new place. And so what Jim proved to be was a student of the sport, and he was able to write up his thoughts and explain them. And that was, it saved a ton of time. And then we could move forward with our strategy.
Well, you hit on a few things there, but one of them, the value of the disc. Like that's why I thought we did well in college. I mean, it's never been more apparent today, because college teams are a little looser. They don't think about it, and we would just not turn it over and just be smart with it and just wait for the next pass. And frankly, that's always been my strategy. I'm known, I would say, for hooking well and having big throws, but I'd only pick them if they were high percentage, because if it's not worth it. Just throw another one, throw a jump pass, throw an under. But yeah, no, that's super interesting. So that took the value of the disc. So you guys didn't value the disc for a while. And then once you started understanding that concept, Jim Paranella bringing it. So how did he get in the mix? Like, was he just a smart guy what was his ultimate background to realize that, oh, this is a smart thing to do, especially since he was younger at that point, right?
Well, he is a very, very smart individual, and he's literally his work is process improvement. It's the way his brain works, is thinking about large scale processes. And here we are as a team. It's kind of no different. How are we going to improve We're going to value the disc. We're going to take what, I loved what he said one time. He's like, just take what they give you. I'm like, because I'm a little slow sometimes. Like, what is he saying? He's saying that if I'm 2 feet in front of you, throw it to me and we
Yeah.
can walk up the field and score the goal. I mean, he's like, take what they give you. And to your point, if the high percentage throws a 40-yard, cut down the line, okay, they've given you that. But if the high percentage throw in this moment at a high count is just a quick flip a couple yards in front of you, take what they give you.
And we'll get to it, but I think that the high percentage throwing and the mentality that everybody has makes it less exciting for some. So we'll get to that. Um, what was it like playing against Kenny Dobbins, New York, that team, and the other players? I'm not as familiar with the other ones outside of Kenny, but you said they were impossible to stop. What was it like playing against them?
They were the best team, and they won 5 in a row. And we, and we of course thought we were the best team, but history has proven it during those years they could not be beaten. They were New Yorkers. They were tougher than we were, and mental toughness matters in sports. They had some incredible athletes. Cribber, Dennis Warrison, incredible vertical leap, great throws. Pat King also, he was tireless. Dave Blau, incredible vertical leap. They had a very deep team with a lot of talented players, and we warred. I mean, we warred, and every year, if we didn't win, which happened those 5 years, one of my strengths and one of my weaknesses is that I come off of losing and say, well, we're going to win next year for sure. And that was my philosophy, that no matter what, we will get better. We'll add players. We'll figure it out. We'll just come back stronger. And finally we were able to break through. But as I said to you before, the two things that I really remember, they also wanted to be exciting. So they went for the big throws and often completed them. Their 4-person play was essentially unstoppable, but forced us to think about junk D. It's,
What do you mean by 4-person play? What does that mean?
That's just off the pull. They know on each side who's cutting. It's like, if we're going to go this way, somebody's cutting. If we fake that way, then somebody's cutting the other way. And they know who those 4 are to score. It's like, boom, 4-person later. I mean, I can't tell you how many goals you end up having scored against you because of the success of that play. And that's when you start to do what you said Japan did, which is don't just come running up the field, but try to force players into areas of the field where you can have a better shot at defense. The second thing that they did, they were very good at putting the zone on at a time when you started to think about, like, you started to get in your own head. Like, whoa, here comes the zone. It's a little windy. Am I going to get that throw? And, the minute you start thinking as opposed to executing, things get a little harder. And they were particularly good at knowing when to put that zone on towards the end of games to finish out a game. They might be behind. They might be ahead by 1. That was a very effective strategy.
When did the zone innovation come into the game? You said at the beginning when you first started playing, there was no plays, man-to-man only. When did that come into play?
That was right out of the gate. The Glassboro State, won in 1979 and 1980, and that's all they played.
Really?
They just played zone, and they controlled the disc on offense. They had 2 or 3 handlers who did exactly what we were talking about before, which was take little things, take what you give, slowly march up the field. So the zone's kind of been there as long as I've been playing, and it may have even been, literally year 1, year 2. And I think because we've all played basketball, we've all, the beauty of the sport is a little bit like football, it's a little bit like basketball, it's a little bit like soccer. So it was pretty easy to bring those innovations into the sport.
Now, when you talk about you said they were really kind of uh, intense or tenacious. I mean, Curto kind of talked a little bit about that. Like New York was just like kind of hard nosed, and you know, what did that? I guess how did that kind of play out between your teams? Were you guys not like that? What was Boston like? Because I imagine you have to be that to some extent to be a champion. You've got to be gritty. You got to be resilient. But what was it about them at least at that time that was different? Did you guys not have that or develop that over time watching them?
Yeah, I think that um, their toughness toughened us up. I
Mm.
think that over time we learned to be tougher. I think ultimately we also became deeper. The biggest thing was that Earth Atomizer was getting better, and they were another Boston team. So we had a bunch of teams, different names: Commonwealth, Ultimate, Big Brother, Titanic. So we had some different names, and then Earth, which Jim, Dennis McCarthy, Alex DeFrantoville, they were on Earth Atomizer. All of a sudden, these two teams in Boston are pretty equal, and we combined. And that on top of that tournament that I just mentioned to you, that Philly tournament, those kinds of, New York had a run. Some of their players retired. We combined. We had that breakthrough, and all of a sudden, it's like a whole new, it's a whole new playing field.
Interesting. Is that what formed Death or Glory? Is that where that team came from out of the two?
Yeah, Death or Glory is I'm sitting there talking to somebody, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't know how much longer I can do this. This year, it's Death or Glory. Like, if we don't
Really?
win, I'm out of here. And then we win 6 in a row. And let's face it, the fact that Paranella can say on video after the first that it's the first of 6 is unbelievable.
No. He said
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's on tape. We win in 94. He's being interviewed. It's like, and somebody says, so what do you think? He's like, first of 6.
He
Amazing.
called it. Not
He
7, not
called it.
5,
Not
6.
5, not 7, one more than New York.
I got to see this
Boom.
video. I got to see
Yeah.
this.
I mean,
That's
I
incredible.
still to this day, I'm like, okay, that is impressive. Would in New York's heyday when they were their strongest, and Dog in its heyday when we were our strongest, what would that game have looked like? You never know, and when you take
Yeah.
these great teams, we both had really, incredible runs. I
So did
feel
those guys
fortunate to
get
have been a
old?
part of it.
Like Kenny Dobbins, did they kind of just get older? Were they older at that point? Or, I
Hard
mean,
to
not to
say.
take away anything from you guys, obviously, but
Hard to say. Move on in your lives. I just didn't get that email where you're supposed to move on. How like I never got the hey, it's time to get married and have kids. I didn't get the email. That's what you're
right,
supposed to do?
right. I missed the text. Yeah.
Yeah, I mixed the text, and they're like, 5 in a row. Who knows? Is it
Right.
work? Is it family? I was lucky enough to be able to play. I give my wife Mary, all the kudos in the world to hang in there with me. She's like, the minute you don't win, you're done. Like, so we were, starting to parent kids, and I'd take them to fools and try not to lose them, because they're
And
3 and you're playing and they're wandering off, and so uh,
I
finally,
can't imagine that.
yeah, no, it's but that's part of the sport is you have community, and potentially you have people helping you when you're trying to both play and raise your kids. But I was lucky to, Mary was an Olympic athlete. She was on the U.S. rowing team. She didn't go to the
Oh,
Olympics, but vied for it. So she
wow.
understood, high level athletics. She understood training, and she understood when we were in the run. She gave me a hall pass, and I'm forever grateful.
I think that that's actually, you know, that's like that's amazing. First of all, because now that I'm married, I know what that's like. And most of my career, I was single, so you don't appreciate that or understand what married guys are going through, right? When they have to balance home life, children, whatever. Because now that I have a son, like it's way different than I used to just be, oh, practice like you know, college, practice every day, just play. Anytime there was pickup, okay, great, practice, track, whatever is like on my own time. But to have, you know, I think a partner that is very supportive is amazing. It means probably the world because you can then continue to play and at a high level, make because it's a commitment. It is a commitment. And I think it gets more so every year as you get older because I know you said you train less now, but at least in your 30s, probably you're like, I got to train more or to keep up with the 25 year. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? That's what
yeah,
I felt
no,
like.
it's true, and you can see our kids, Ben and Nicole, are in '94 when we win. They're in bumblebee suits, sitting in the cup. So they're these tiny little kids, uh, and that's not '94, sorry, '99. One's 2 and one's 6 months old, and so I was able to play a little bit with them, and then it was time to move on.
What is it about what is it about Boston though with having multiple good teams? I mean, when I played, we had like Dog was still around when I was younger in college, but then like Twisted Metal was around. And is it just like with all the colleges around there, there's just a lot of kids coming up and they don't
Oh,
make
they did.
teams, so
They
they kind
they
of
didn't tell
pull
you
a team together.
it's in the water.
It's in the
They
water.
didn't tell
It's in the
they didn't
water.
tell you that. Like we got it comes from the Quabbin, and it's like that's it. It's like we drink the
Uh,
water, and you don't have the water, so you.
that's
No,
it.
I think it's
That's
what you
it.
said.
It's in the
It's the
water.
colleges. It's also a sports town. It's the combination, of those two things. So you have all these different teams that you're watching, that you're playing this sport. You got these colleges feeding into it. There's a lot of the future of ultimate might be college for all we know, because more and more colleges are playing. You got the college championship. You got loyalties for fans, all that kind of stuff. So I do think that's what really propels Boston, besides the water.
Water. The Boston does have a good sports tradition. The Celtics, you know, they run a lot of good. You've had a good. The Patriots were good for so long. Yeah, it's
Yeah, Ben used to think, because Ben and Nicole. So Ben's born in '98. Nicole's born in '99. And if you look at Boston teams between 2000 and 2010, they won everything. And so Ben thought, that's it, that we just win everything. My
the
dad won,
sports town. Yeah,
Frisbee Ultimate, and then Patriots, Red Sox, Celtics. About the only team that didn't win was the Revolution. They get to the finals, and then, that's a horse of a different color. And the
that's
other
not
thing
even an
that's
American.
great,
It's not even an American sport, so it's okay. That
the other thing that's great is that the women's team in Boston have been so good. Blue was the first. Boston Ladies Ultimate is the first national champion. Uh, when you go all the way back to, I think that was '81. And then you have Zulu, which is Zoo Disc Women in '82. So they're technically the first winning college team. And I was just listening to Go Deep, the podcast yesterday, and they talked about Kansas won the first college nationals. Technically, yes, they did. But Zoo Women had won back in 1982 against all women's teams. And then you have Godiva, which is amazing. You have the Spinsters. They were great. You have Brute Squad, obviously great. So the fact that we have, and you have mixed teams that are great. You have Slow White, you have Sprocket. I mean, that again speaks to the community here, feeding each other, making the teams better. Nothing better than having, people that you're hanging out with, going to the same tournaments that you're going with, and the social life mixing with the competitive stuff.
I also feel like I mean, Boston's a big city, but everything feels pretty close there. And with all the colleges so close, like I feel like you can get to play. Now, I know I'm sure you had people that lived in Providence and Western Mass or whatever, but like at least the core is probably not too far away from each other. Doesn't seem that when I was there, it didn't seem that hard to kind of get around. And with constant young blood coming up, like there's always probably people to play and push you, right? Keep you fresh and except in the wintertime, of course, when you do other things, right?
Yeah, and you're speaking to another passion of mine, which is cycling. Um, I've been on my bicycle essentially my whole life. In Boston, I rode my bike to work when I was in my 20s. I ride everywhere now. It's not that I'm doing 100-mile, rides. I just use my bike to get around. I ride to the top of the hill a couple of times, and again, to my point, you get 20 minutes up to the top of Summit Ave twice. A couple of guys on the team in 82, in order to get in shape, they became bike messengers. So two or three guys, they're like, I'm going to combine making a living, a few bucks with getting in shape, and what better way? So Boston is small, and more to your point, you can get around, and you get that feeder from the different colleges.
So to get back to the championships, uh, I've heard it said, and I think it's true, but one of the hardest things, or the hardest thing in sports, well, maybe besides hitting a baseball, would be to win a championship the second time, back to back. Not necessarily winning, but winning it back to back, just because it's so hard to win in and of itself, but winning it back to back. You guys did it 6 times in a row. What was how hard was that? I mean, I know you guys had a super talented team, but what did it take to be able to keep such a high level of play for so long and not falter? I mean, just not to have a gap. I mean, 6 years in a row, that's literally incredible. It's hard enough to do one, but you guys did it so many times in a row. What did it take?
Well, the first thing I credit is New York. That they, by having them dominate us for those years, it hardened you. And then when you finally win, you realize, oh, okay, it's a mental thing. It's like we were right at the cusp, but we didn't quite have what it took to get over. Didn't either have the right number of players or the right players, but we also didn't quite have the mental toughness that we needed. And once you cross that line, once you had been beaten and been frustrated and sort of, hit your head against the wall so many times, there was a release, and you became more relaxed, frankly. Under pressure, you were more relaxed, which is kind of, it's almost an oxymoron, but it's true. And I think also the way that the team sort of, there was a defense, there was an offense. We were good about running them separately, and allowing leaders of the defense to do their thing and leaders of the offense to do our thing, and not try to sort of have people telling each other what to do. I mean, there's always some of people chastising each other, jokingly. And then I remember coming off the field one time at halftime of a final game, and this gets to what you're talking about. And there's this random fan. He's sitting there, and we've just been in our huddle. I don't even remember what the score was. It's 96 or something. And we're walking back to the field, and I get eye contact with him, and he says, "It's not desire. Everybody wants to win. It's, do you have the will to win?" I'm like, who are you? Like, he's not a player. He's just some random guy who says this, and it was so true. Do you have the will? Did you put the work in? And now, are you going to translate that onto the field? Everybody wants to win. That's not the same. And I wish I could find that guy again and give him a big hug.
Interesting. The will to win. So define the will in your words.
I think that, you're down by 5 against North Carolina. It's the semis. They're playing unbelievable. I don't remember what year it was. They're going to win. They're killing us. And one of our players is throwing his hat down. He's pissed. Motherfucker, I can't believe it. And we just like, okay, we're not going to get it back all at once. It's going to come in fits and starts. We're going to get 2, they get back 1. We're going to get 3, they're going to get back 1. And then it's going to be close at the end, and we're going to win. And we did. Now, 10 years before that, I've been the guy throwing the hat down, yelling at my players for not playing well enough. I would have been. I was immature. You get to that point, it's like, okay, deep breath. They can't keep playing like that. They're playing out of their heads. They're going to run out of gas. they're going to start making mistakes. It's just the way the game is going to roll, and that's what happened.
But that reminds me of so many times, not necessarily in my career, but, I remember, I think it was when the Giants came back from the 49ers in the playoff game and they were down by like 3 touchdowns or something. And I remember like the whoever it was, the quarterback or the coach saying, "Hey, you can't score 3 touchdowns at once. Let's just focus on scoring 1 touchdown. And then we're going to focus on scoring 1 touchdown," right? Like you can't go win the game, like recover in the game, get back in it in one play. You've got to do it multiple times in small increments, right? And I think that's a little bit about kind of what you're saying. And I even think about it against Revolver in 2016. We were down at halftime. Ironside was down 8-5, and they literally hadn't turned it over.
I watched that
And
game.
yeah, and I remember saying to McCarthy, because everybody was just kind of like wigging a little bit because this was our year, we've been playing so well. And I literally, I remember saying, I was like, if they're going to play this way the rest of the game, they deserve to win. But if they don't, which is highly likely, we're going to be there to take it away. So we just need to keep doing what we're doing because we had a good game plan. It's not like we played that poorly. They just literally were flawless. And that really doesn't happen. So we knew we were going to get some opportunities. We just needed to take advantage of them. So it was
I
that
love
will to be there when they faltered. And I mean, we helped take it away, of course, but you just got to keep pushing.
I love watching that game. I watched that game, and I congratulations first of all. And
Thank
I remember Mike Payne at halftime. He's being interviewed, and he says, "We haven't turned it over yet." And I'm like, I can't believe he said that. Did he actually say that? I wouldn't have said that. The next thing
Yeah.
you know, it's like 2 turnovers, like the whole game opens up. And it's exactly what you said, which is, okay, if they keep playing like that, then they're going to win. But if you got a no hitter, you don't talk about it.
Right. You don't talk to the pitcher. You just like nobody touches him in the dugout, talks to him, leave him alone. Leave him
Yeah,
alone.
yeah. So I was
Don't poke
like,
the bear.
when he said that, I'm like, this could get interesting just because he said that. And sure
Yeah.
enough, you guys came back and won, which was awesome. And I loved I watched the finals of the men this year, and I loved it for a different reason. First of all, Micah Glass, I was sort of, hey, I got to watch him because Mike Glass and I have been playing a couple of times at the beach, not the beach tournament, the tournament in October down in Florida. And obviously Mike Glass and I are huge competitors during the years of
Are you
the
referring to Nationals, the tournament down in Florida? Is that what you're referring to?
nationals. But not let me back up. So anyway, I'm watching finals,
Right.
and they are putting it up. Micah Glass had a throw early in the game, which was one of the best throws I've seen. It was like he got the disc and he just ripped it right, maybe 2 or 3 feet above a defender who would have jumped up and tried to block it, to a guy on a full run. Not a hanger, not a blade, just this perfect throw to a deep receiver. And then the whole game went like that, where they were fearless in a way that, even though one would say, oh, it's kind of boring, 10-point win. It's like, yeah, but if you listen to the interview at the end, one of the guys in the interview said, long live the long game. Small ball
I
is
think
dead.
Raffy said that.
Yeah,
Raffy Hayes
and I was
said
like,
that. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, so that was exciting on a different level. Now, where it takes me is, I think I hinted at this earlier in this conversation. We need more turnovers. Like, what's exciting is when teams come back. What's exciting is, a block for a goal. What's exciting is they're up by 2, now they're down by 1, comebacks. And what isn't exciting is a team gets ahead and stays ahead, and it's just like whoever received the pull is going to win. So that's sort of my first, point. And how you do that? Well, you innovate. One of the best games I ever played in, we lost, but it was incredibly exciting. It was a
Isn't it
final
funny how that
game.
works? I
Yeah,
can relate. Go ahead. Yep.
it was a final game. Uh, and it was one of those tournaments where we were experimenting. They had a 2 point line, and we're ahead 14-11 game to 15. We're ahead 14-11 game to 15. Uh, and the only way they can win is with 2 points, because if they score one, the way the rules were written, game over. But as long as they were scoring two, the game kept going. Or you had to be within a certain, I don't remember the technicalities. Point is, they had to go for the 2 pointer. Talk about exciting. So they, you know, we don't score to get to 15. They put up a bunch of 2 pointers, end up winning the game, and the fans get a very exciting game. I want to kill myself, but that innovation we sort of walked away from, and that was a long time ago. And I have no idea if people are still talking about 2 point lines and whether it's a fallacy to think about it. But what are those innovations that are going to create that kind of excitement?
That's interesting. I think they tried that in the MLU. Like they did that at one point, and I don't know if it like caused people to just not play good defense until people got past the 2 point line. But I think they did a scrimmage at Potlatch in 2006 where I was part of the Southeast, and I think they did that. But yeah, it was always like sag off if somebody's at that 2 point line, but once they get past, then okay, then you can go back. But then we would like throw it backwards, because you can go backwards in Ultimate, so we throw it back to try to maybe get one. And it's interesting. I mean, so let's talk about this because I think this is you'll have a unique perspective, and I think that you know you came from maybe it sounds like you played in an era where they valued the disc a little bit less until Perinella came along. Well, I'd be curious, was it a lot of hucks and stuff? Because I feel like when I first started playing, people hucked it a lot more. And not to say that they don't do that today, but Rhino this past year, to use as an example, was really the only team I saw hucking. And they were, not to say that that's the better routes. I don't think it is. I kind of think they were a little fearless. And guys like Micah and Henry Ing, like he had another one from the end zone in the semis. I was sitting there right there in the end zone because it's 10 minutes from my house. And he just unleashed a bomb, like stalled two or whatever, but kind of ripped it. It was a really confident throw for somebody his age, and I was really impressed. But it was like, oh, they just didn't have fear, and they took, maybe it was a lower percentage shot, but it worked, and it was exciting to watch. The previous semi, New York versus Revolver. Now that was a much different game. It was like less hucking, and it was more like them taking what the defense gave and trying to work and massage the defense back and forth, with handler movements. And I, as a player, appreciate that because I played the sport and I know what it takes. But I always try to put my objective hat on and try to think, okay, would my uncle enjoy watching this if he never played, right? Would my cousin or friend over here enjoy it? And I don't think that type of game, like the handler movement, which is where the game has really, I think, gone to, like the quick, just swirl around the disc pretty much all the way up the field, is nowhere near as exciting as like airing it out and seeing some potentially skies and some turnovers. What do
Yeah,
you say to that?
I agree. And your question in there was, what was like the beginning when we started playing that is, yeah, we threw and hucked with abandon, and the reason is we thought we'd always get it back. So there was never any fear of, oh, if we turn it over, they're going to score. It was always, if we turn it over, we're going to get a block, and that'll be just as much fun as if we had caught it the original time. That was sort of the Rude Boy philosophy, was we can get it back. Now it ended up being not the case. In time, we didn't get it back, and you learn to value the disc. But I do think Windy City put it up. The Circus, they launched. I mean, huck after huck. We lost to them at Fools. I was the goat, not for the right reason, like goat as in, bah, why did you just get skied again? Like, why don't you cover those guys?
That
Danny
happened.
Weiss just letting it rip time after time. Hostages, same thing. Love to go deep. So I think the game was much more wide open, more turnovers, more people thinking and teams thinking they could get it back. And then slowly but surely we've become more conservative. To my point earlier about Billy Ball, once you really realize, value the disc, a turnover is worth like 5 points, then your team isn't going to play you if you're putting it up and not connecting.
Yeah. So do you think that what can we do to fix that? I mean, you mentioned a 2-point line. Is that the solution? I mean,
Well,
we've got the UFA now,
one of the
and
things that you mentioned, back to the spirit of innovation, like tournaments, there should be one or two tournaments where you just try stuff and see what happens, because you don't really know. You were talking about 2-point line, people are sort of falling off and you can throw it backwards, but are we trying enough new things? And back to that, football is innovating now. Baseball is talking about the golden bat. I mean, basketball used to have, it didn't have a 24-second clock, didn't have 3-point line, so we watch all these other sports innovating, and I would encourage us to, at least experiment and maybe commit 1 or 2 tournaments to just that.
are there any specific rules that you think we should do, or ways of playing you think we should?
Well, I do think the 2-point line is something to
Okay.
revisit. And it doesn't have to be exactly the way it was before. What does that mean? Do you get 2 points if you're 25 yards out? Do you get 2 points if you're 35 yards out? Once you cross it, you can't go back? That part I don't know as much as that's going to open it up. It's going to open it up to more risk taking that potentially leads to excitement, leads to turnovers, that kind of thing. So that's one of the things. I also think, as I mentioned before about the rugby sevens, I think those games were 6-minute halves, like 6-minute halves. They were so quick that you kind of had to go for it because the time was running out all the time. It's like you didn't have time to be conservative. So they were trying things, and you had these long runs and, breakthroughs. So there's something about shortening it up. This speaks to, well, people are like, oh, Mooney's lost his mind. Like, he's going to make the sport horrible. No, he's not. I'm not even involved in the sport. But I reflect on surfing. Okay, along comes shortboard. And everybody's like, oh, this is going to ruin the sport. It didn't ruin the sport. It innovated the sport. And there's still people who love the longboard. And all they want to do is, endless summer and chase that perfect wave. Meanwhile, you have all this exciting competition going on. So I think that, we shouldn't be afraid to try these new kinds of things. Shortening like a half doesn't mean that other tournaments aren't going to have a full game. So those are some of my ideas.
I love the idea of taking 1 or 2 tournaments throughout the year and trying some different things. That's great. So I think you answered my next question. So you're not really involved in the sport at all. You're not.
I,
What's
I
your
was on the
what
board.
does that look?
I was on the board of USAU for a number of years. That was a great experience, and that was probably 3 years ago. I came off the board. I'm on the board of Ultimate Impact, Rocky Beach, and his organization that brings the sport to different schools in the San Francisco area, and really brings not only the sport but brings aspects of the character of the sport and leadership and respect. So that's been a really good opportunity. I've been involved and done some coaching with Ultimate Peace. I went to Israel, and that was an incredible experience as well. So in that sense, certainly involved. I played in Legends with a small L, the Legends division, meaning over a certain age, down in Florida 2 years ago and 3 years ago. And that was a wake-up call because, back to our earlier point, running at this point in your life, you really better be ready. So my involvement in the sport is, I'm in it. I watch it. I am thrilled to be here with you. Frankly, I'm honored. I'm honored to be on the Ultimate Impact board, and I try to give back where I can.
I'm going to ask you about that. But what was it like being on the USA Ultimate board? Like, I guess how are you pleased with where the state of the game is from when you played to where it is now? Is it different than what you thought it was going to be? And where do you kind of see it going? I mean, you talked about innovation, so I think that's there, but anything else?
I mean, uh, I am thrilled that we're here. Like, we're over 50 years old. We have colleges competing. We have a pro league. We have a national championship. We have kids. We have multiple divisions. We play around the world. Let's just stop for a second. Like, it's amazing. Now, can we grow more? Sure. Is there competition for eyeballs? Never been more competition for eyeballs than there are right now. But we still have something magical, like literally magical in this sport. And the way that the disc flies in and of itself is magic. The running after a disc in flight is magic. The multiple game tournament format is magic. All of these things make this sport special. That we have spirit and fair play is magic. So I don't worry about the future. We're going to get to 100. We sort of passed that mark where a sport, either makes it or doesn't. We're in it. We're and so to your point about what was it like on the board, well, there was this all, Olympics, not Olympics, and that's been going on since the beginning of time. What does it take to get into the Olympics? I mean, we know you have to have eyeballs. You have to have people watching on TV. You have to have people watching the streaming. You have to have advertising, all those things. Ultimately, you can have the most exciting sport and not be in the Olympics. You can have a sport that's not all that exciting and somehow makes it because people are watching it. So where I was in that debate is, let's stay true to who we are. Let's stay true to the sport that we love. The innovations, they're not going to ruin our sport. If we make it a shorter game, it's not going to ruin our sport. If we put in a 2-point line, it's not going to ruin our sport. If we make some changes, other sports have done that all along the way. We shouldn't be afraid of it. And then one day, if the Olympics happen, that's a result as opposed to the goal. That's just my sort of thought there. It's like you just keep trying to make the sport as good as you can, and one day it may end up breaking through, but it was never the primary goal for me.
Do you think there was too much focus on the Olympics? I mean, I know like that was a big thing for Tom Crawford, but do you think there was too much focus and then we lost focus on, I don't know, the youth or something else? I mean, I know the game has evolved, there was a rebranding and all that, but I know that was a big part of kind of the last tenure.
Yeah, you can't. In some ways, you can't blame Tom Crawford for being a part of the Olympic family. That's where he comes from. He and his wife is part of the Olympic family. She does a lot of work, with the logistics for the Team USA. So he really understood what it was like, what it would mean for us. And so, as much criticism as he got, I mean, it was just in him. It was like that's partly who he was. And he brought a lot of, he brought a lot of discipline, professionalism to the office and to the staff. So I'm not sure I loved the multiple tournaments. I understood it. Like, we're going to have a
Like the Triple
pro.
Crown, you mean?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get it. More chances for us. I mean, that was part of how can we, build our, audience base. So I understood all of that. And, I think Knob is tireless, and his ability to get countries to sign up and become part of the federation has been incredible, so that we have actually had a shot. But again, for me, the primary goal isn't do we make it into the Olympics. For me, the primary goal might be to become a varsity sport in Massachusetts. We were the leading sport last month, beating out Flag and all of the others to get to varsity accreditation for high schools, and just missed the bar. So that kind of
Wow.
work, I think, is important.
Didn't it
And
become varsity in Vermont? I think it was.
I believe it's been, I can't tell you which states, there aren't many, but that to me is where we're going to see
That's
the
awesome.
success, is get into those. I mean, Seattle had the best model years ago when they got into the middle schools. Next thing you know, the sport really grew in that city. So we know what that model looks like.
When you were talking earlier about uh, the way the disc flies, and there's something magical about that. You talked about kind of the things that are magical in the sport. I totally agree with that. That's honestly why I love Frisbee. There's just like something about throwing a backhand or a flick and just letting it float and just fly. And I loved chasing it when I was younger. Still do. In fact, I'd always go to the beach, and if I had somebody good that knew how to throw, just throw me endless discs running into the wave, trying to jump over the wave, catch it. Just like there's something magical about that. I used to joke I was like a dog, just like throw it again, throw it again, throw it again. You mentioned like the spirit and fair play as something magical about it. Can you like talk about that too, of like what that means to you within the sport?
I'm gonna answer that, but before I do, I have to reflect on one pass in particular that speaks to the magic of a thrown disc. So once upon a time, Kenny Dobbins and I played on the same team, and it was Fools, and he was very young. He had long hair, and he was a very, very passionate player. And we're down in Manassas, Virginia, or wherever we are, and it's wet and it's windy and it's April Fool's Fest. And they pull the disc, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk up to the corner. And the way the wind is, I think I can throw it straight out of bounds into the wind, and then it'll boomerang down and end up in the end zone. And I kind of look at Dobbins, and I put the lefty backhand straight out of bounds. And most of the players are like, what are you thinking? And the only person who ran was Dobbins. And he ran all the way downfield and caught it for the goal. And I never did it again successfully. Every other time I threw it out of bounds, it stayed out of bounds, and I was the jerk. That one time, it stayed in, and he caught it. So,
Yeah,
needless to say.
that's
So back to
amazing.
your question about spirit
That just
and
shows his skill though, because if he ran, he's the only one that ran for it. He just had a field vision. You talked about your awareness. Like I think what sets the best players apart, because there's a lot of great athletes that play, is just the vision, the field sense. Like, oh, he just knew sixth sense. This is where it's going.
yeah, no, it was good. It was a great. That's a great tournament. We just had so much fun there. So that was one of those memorable plays. I mean, the spirit thing. The when I was in my 20s, uh, I did not understand. I didn't really understand spirit the way that I've come to understand it later in life. How could I? I was in my 20s, and
That,
to embody fair play at the level that the people who founded this game wrote the rules. And when they wrote the rules to say, basically have fun and never at the expense of your opponent. Like, you don't cheat to win. And, and I was too competitive to really understand what they were saying in those phrases. And it took a long time, and even after my career, to really understand what they're saying, which is life is short and we need to respect each other. And, so it was a lifelong learning for me. And still, like, I credit, the sport for teaching me what it means to be a good person, to be fair. And I'm not always a good person. Sometimes I'm a jerk. I'm too competitive. And sometimes it gets away from me still. But it's that sport that brings me back and says, okay, we're here and we're not here at the expense of the others. And believe me, I had plenty of moments where I was anything but spirited.
I know what you're talking about because, when you come from sports like basketball and baseball and lacrosse and all that, they're all refereed. So you're playing you're not trying to not be a bad player, but like you play to win, and not it's not necessarily win at all costs, but it's kind of like, hey, if the ref didn't call it, like then it's okay. They'll probably they're kind of managing the, you know, the level of physicality or whatever, right? But in ultimate, you largely need to do that yourself. And so there's a certain, I think it is a great life skill, whatever you call it, spirit of the game, like sportsmanship. I mean, I know the only, I think I'm going to do a video on this one time, but I think it's like the rule that should be in every sport. Like in UFA, they have the integrity rule. Like if the ref doesn't see it, you can still be like, no, that was a foul. Like I actually got him. Could you imagine if that was a rule in every sport? The only sport that I've ever seen it that I can remember is in tennis, where
Oh, right.
they'll serve and like, joke, whatever. Somebody will serve it and the guy will be like, hey, you should challenge that because they called it out, but that was it. And I've seen that before and they're like, wait, is this for real? Like they called it out, just challenge it. It's it. If they don't, and in, like, so I've seen that happen multiple times, a few times in tennis. I don't know. I've never, could you imagine if it's like the Celtics, right? You're a Boston guy, and all of a sudden, like, Jason Tatum in the game 7 of the finals, he goes up to block, I don't know, Steph Curry, and he like hits his arm a little bit, but the ref doesn't call it, and the shot kind of goes, and he goes, the ref doesn't call it. In every scenario, pretty much ever, they'd be like, didn't touch him, Or could you imagine if he was like, you know what, I got him, like, that was not a fair shot because I actually hit his arm, right? Could you imagine if he self-called a foul in the finals, game 7 of the NBA? Really, heck, any moments, because you really don't see that. Think about that in football, right? It's like those types of things. Imagine the sport, like, imagine what message that sends to kids, right? Ultimate doesn't have near as much visibility, but I think to your point about life lessons, I was like, hey, you play to win, like, yeah, you may be more aggressive than you should. I look back, I'm like, yeah, there was probably moments I was too aggressive and too kind of hard nosed, right? But now I look back, I'm like, oh, like there is a goodness to justice in fair play, right? Like giving your opponent what he's due, right? And also integrity is courage when you're in the finals, semifinals, and you go up and you miss it. You kind of get hit, but it really didn't affect the play. Like it takes courage to be like, all right, you know what? That was a good play. Like I really didn't get it despite, the pedigree that you think you are. Right. So I don't know. I just think that there's a thing there that is, I don't know. I don't want to say it's unique to Ultimate, but Ultimate has that level of sportsmanship, right? Integrity that you don't see very often elsewhere.
Yeah, I really agree with your examples too. And I think one thing we have to be careful of, and I think we're getting better at this, even though Ultimate has this clause called spirit of the game, we don't want to be arrogant about it. Like every kid grows up playing without a ref. Like they play pick up something, they play, tennis, as you mentioned, or pick up basketball, whatever. So you start out by knowing who's cheating and who isn't, because there isn't anybody there but you all, right? So, and then over
Right.
time, games get refed and whatnot. So I want to be more inclusive about spirit. It's like, to recognize tennis for what it is, that you learn to make your calls, because that there's no umps when you're first playing tennis. It's the ball's in, it's out. If you're cheating, he knows, she knows, whatever. So I just think let's be careful not to think we're the only, because we're not. And secondly, I really have been following lots of women's sports lately. I went to the finals of USA soccer in Paris, and
Mm.
followed them as they got better with their new coach, and thought, this, they're not flopping. They're playing with a level of spirit that the men aren't playing with. And then I watched Caitlin, and now the rivalries that are happening in women's basketball, and we can learn from what's right in front of us, which is how women are playing sports at a very high level, and how
Mm.
exciting it is, and how many people they're drawing to these games. So I want to make sure that we're not alone. It's happening in other places, and it's not a threat to us to recognize where else it's.
I like what you said there because I do think Ultimate, in my opinion, likes to think of Spirit of the Game as this special thing that makes us very different in that it is only unique to Ultimate and that it's like a thing that only Ultimate can have. Um, but in my opinion, at the end of the day, that's just good sportsmanship, good integrity, having a high level of virtue when you are playing sports, right? When you are playing against another opponent, treating them with, the respect that they're due. Because it kind of going back to what I said, I would want that, whatever you call it, spirit, sportsmanship, whatever to be in every sport, right? I think that is something that shouldn't only be unique, but should just be a level of fair play in every sport, right? I think that's a beautiful thing, and it teaches us so much about life as well.
And equally, I know that there people talk about the mixed division, and I love the mixed division. It's 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 so great that we have an open division, a women's division, and then we play together in a mixed division. And I remember when it was first, when it first sort of came together, I thought this potentially could differentiate us if we jump on this right away. So many sports don't, and now it's a little bit less now because we're sort of further along, and the landscape has changed. But it goes back to the beginning. We've traveled to Mars with 5 or 6 women and got to the finals of that tournament and playing all teams that were all men, and it was the most fun you could have. To be in this tournament, to be driving out to Mars and back, in a mixed environment. I just think that's really a special thing that we shouldn't lose sight of.
Do you think the mixed division is equally as exciting to watch as men or women, like the men or open or women's?
I haven't watched as much as I have watched the men's and women's divisions, and so I think it's going to depend, obviously, on the matchup, and frankly, it's going to depend on whether everybody's an equal on the field. So it's going to be up to all of the players to see each other as equals and to know how to throw to different players depending on their speed, their jumping ability, all that kind of thing, and not look players off. So I think the excitement comes when you find teams that are really playing as equals and you treating everybody on the field as equals. I think then you potentially have a very exciting game, as opposed to if a team is really dominating with 3 players, for example, and not sharing the disc.
So you just made me think of something because I'm not against the mixed division at all. What I don't like about, and it's not the division itself, is that I would prefer to see the mixed division take place at a different time. Like I think Australia does it, China, I believe, does it. And just because I feel like it takes away some of the better athletes that could help improve the men and maybe even more so the women's game as well and elevate that.
Right.
So I would love to see it at least separated like some of those other countries.
And that may happen. That may be
Yeah,
something that happens in time. I can't speak to that because I'm not in the tournaments. Losing
right.
players like Tanner Johnson, who's the nephew of one of the original Rude Boys, Joe Johnson. He's a
Oh,
great player, and now he's in the mixed division. And to your point, he obviously can make a huge difference in the open. But it's fun to
yeah.
follow him. I thought maybe Sprocket would pull it off.
Hmm. Yeah. But the thing I was thinking about though is I think uh like the women's game now, sometimes those games, and I don't watch I don't really watch mixed. I don't watch a lot of women's games. Like I don't watch a ton of men games, but at nationals, I have friends and stuff, so I typically watch more of the men. But I do enjoy watching like the top women's games, which is what I'll see usually the finals. And honestly, like the USA Colombia final, I don't know if you watched the
Yeah.
World Ultimate Championships. that was really exciting. And I think
Yeah,
some of the women's finals have been more exciting than the men. And it goes back to one of the things you said earlier is that turnovers help create excitement. And
yeah.
the women's game has more turnovers. And frankly, like because of that, like you kind of don't know what's going to happen. You know, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened, or like, hey, this was thrown away or it was dropped or whatever. I mean, look back at I watched the 2022 World Club Championships, Revolution versus Fury. That was a super exciting game because there was kind of like back and forth. And then Colombia US was super exciting to watch just because of like kind of didn't know what was going to happen. But, you know, and like the men, USA just kind of demolished Japan. It really wasn't a contest. And, you know, generally when teams are ahead, they're just so crisp and like at that level, you're kind of like, no, they're going to score, right? Like what excitement is that?
No, I've watched the game you're talking about, USA Colombia, and you said what? Why do we watch sports? Because we don't know what's going to happen. Like that's exactly what you that. Why do we watch it? Well, we watch it because we love our favorite team. No, no, we watch it because we don't know what's going to happen. Why do they even entertain the golden bat? Because then we won't know what's going to happen. It's going to be potentially more exciting. So that USA Colombia, you know, there are blocks, there's turnovers, there's lead change. The United States is dominant, but they might lose to this incredible team that's just putting it all on the line. We don't know how it's going to end. That's what makes for great TV. I mean, if we want to
Yeah.
cut to the chase of what's missing
Yeah.
right now is some of that.
Well, we're getting near the end, and I've taken a bunch of your time, Steve. But what do you have like a favorite memory or kind of story that you think would be something fun to share, or if there's something else you wanted to chat about, be happy to. But I think it'd be cool to maybe hear something from your kind of time that maybe is just a cool story to share.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. I'm not sure you're going to use it, but whatever. So it's back to when you're driving out to Mars, Pennsylvania for that tournament, and you're in your 20s, and it's really hot. I mean, it's so hot. You're wearing black t-shirts because you're stupid, and you know you're like, all right, when the Saturday's over, we got to go swimming. So we head to the pool, and as we get to the town pool, the lifeguard's leaving. And they're like, you can't swim here. I'm like, oh, okay, please look at us. We're a mess. We got to. And they're like, no, 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 close at 5, and they lock up. So we like let them drive away, and we climb over the fence to jump in the pool. I mean, of course you would. You're in your 20s. It's like 100 degrees out.
Right.
And of course, they saw you do that, and they called the police. And the police show up. Now, meanwhile, I'm off getting beer, and so somehow I don't get caught, but 13 of them do, and they take them down to the station and start to write them up a ticket. And I arrive, and I think this was 83, or maybe it was, I don't know, 84, 83, I don't remember. And I arrive, and I'm all like in my 20s, feeling all captainy, and I go up to the lady who's essentially running the police station, and I say, what's going on? And she's like, well, they've trespassed. And I say, do you know who we are? Thinking that we're the Rude Boys. We're national and future world champions of ultimate frisbee. And she says, no, you're not. You're juvenile delinquents. And I'll like I said, you may not use that story, but it was one of those memories of when you're
That's
young,
hilarious.
you do some
When
silly stuff.
when you're young, you do silly things. Well, you can now say that juvenile delinquents won a world championship and national championship. So
The
anything's
fine the
possible.
fine was 93.50. People, most people paid it. There's statute of limitations. Some people waited out their 7 years or said, I'm never going back to Pennsylvania. But I'm sure that's not the story you were looking for.
No, no, no. That's great. That's great. Okay, I actually thought of two more things, if you don't mind. But
Absolutely.
one, I want you to talk about what you're doing now in the sport because I read a little bit. You have a blog now. I don't know if that's necessarily uh, related to the sport. Ultimate Impact, Ultimate Peace. What is that? What's your involvement in that? And has that been rewarding? What can you maybe share about that for people that don't know what that is?
Yeah, in both of those cases, David Barkin, started Ultimate Peace to bring Arabs, Palestinians, Israelis together uh, in the Middle East and to share the sport and the values of working together. And he has run that for a long time and now runs a camp in this country, bringing different kids together from different backgrounds to teach them about mutual respect and character and the game of Ultimate. And through the game of Ultimate Peace, Ultimate Impact, Rocky Beach in California has brought it to underserved middle school, elementary and middle school kids, so an even younger group, and introduce them to the sport. It's kids who may not have found a sport yet, and so they're intrigued. They may be ones that are magic of throwing a disc just gets them. And again, that organization is teaching more than how do you throw a two-finger or backhand. They're teaching what it means to be a part of a team, what it means to respect each other, what it means to have a community. And these are things that some of these kids don't have. So both of those are opportunities for us to make sure that others experience what we experienced and at a young age. And what's really important in those is the kids see coaches that care for them. They see coaches who are really trying to improve their situation. And sometimes they don't have that in their lives. Their parents are working hard. They might be working two jobs. So to me, it's an opportunity to spread the game, help diversify the game in terms of the audiences and the communities that we're a part of.
That's great. That's super awesome. Yeah, you'll have to let me know if I can help at all with any of that down the road. But that's super cool. I think it's great. Just getting back to what we were talking about earlier around the virtue, the values that Ultimate can bring. I think the integrity, the spirit of the game, sportsmanship, whatever. That's just those are life skills that you can learn, and sometimes I think it's easier sometimes to learn them in Ultimate than maybe in other sports, just because of how it's taught.
I know I'd ask you the same question just because you're somebody who's thinking about the sport and played at a high level, championship level. What do you owe to the sport? Like, what do you feel you can attribute in your life that came out of playing the sport?
Interesting, because I was literally just going to ask you, what advice do you have for me who is just leaving the sport? Uh, you know, what 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 advice do you have? That was very generic. So you can you can answer that after, but I would say, gosh, I mean, one, I think Ultimate gave me a lot of confidence in myself. I was always a good athlete, but I moved around a lot and I went to different schools, and so I wasn't like the type of athlete that if you came in for the school like, oh, you're like, we need to give you a spot on the team per se, because I was kind of what's called a late bloomer, so I didn't really get tall and somewhat. I'm not really that muscular still. I'm still kind of skinny, but I didn't really develop my athleticism until later. And at that point, I kind of was locked into running and then lacrosse. And I found Frisbee right around the same time as I was kind of developing I was coming into my body. And I was kind of naturally good at it. I was just, I loved to run and track down the disc. And it really gave me a sense of confidence, a sense of purpose for kind of coming out of my high school, middle school years, being the kind of shy, a little awkward, and, sort kind of thrust me into a position of leadership, a position of kind of, being one of the guys people looked to on the team, and I had never had any of that type of experience before. So I think it really helped me grow as a person and develop skills that I had never had before. And then it also, not to mention, I mean, just, grace under pressure, like learning to, uh, let me take a step back. The dedication that it takes to be a top player, you don't just get to be that because you're really smart or really athletic. Like, you have to have a lot of different components and you need to work at it. I talked about the will earlier. Like, I I would I never thought I had like good discipline, but Ultimate gave me these goals to achieve. Like, okay, I want to be a champion. I want to be the best player on my team. I want to be the best player in the country. I want to be the best player in the world, win a world championship, right? Like, it gave me these goals. And so I would then work backwards. Okay, how do I achieve these goals? What does it take? And I mean, I remember working, and I'd be on business trips, and at midnight at hotels, I'd be doing plyometrics and jump rope and stuff to stay in shape and stay ahead because, we had to have full-time jobs. We don't really make money playing the sport. Maybe one day. But so it just gave me a sense of purpose and that, like, a discipline and of work ethic that I don't know if it's not that I didn't have it, but it helped me develop that, which has proven really well for business and in life because, the level of commitment it takes in a sport, I think any sport, is very high.
Yeah, I love your answer, and I will be saying some of the same things. You asked the question, what's my advice? Um, I think that in you there's a voice telling you what to do, and there's another voice telling you, oh, you can't do that. Like, everybody has that. Those two, and Ultimate helped us quiet the voice that's saying you can't do that. We learned that we can do it, which is everything you just described: building confidence through disciplined work ethic, and then in time through leadership. And slowly but surely that negative voice goes away, and now you're in it again. Like, okay, I don't know exactly what you're doing, but family, business, entrepreneurship, and that voice might come back, that negative, I'm not sure I can do that. Yes, you can, because you just did. It's like all of the things that we accomplished in Ultimate are now a part of us, and they give us the strength to do it again. So for me, I just retired a year and a half ago after 30 years, 32 years at the same marketing agency. And for all those years, I was afraid to write because I didn't think I could. I was a bad speller, grammar, had a hard time reading aloud. I was very good verbally, but I was a terrible writer. And then I started writing at 50 or 55, and now I'm 29. But all of a sudden
You're the curious case of Benjamin Button.
Yeah, exactly. And I got more and more into writing, and I was able to quiet that voice of not good enough, you're not a writer. And now I can say I'm a writer, and I'm going to write a book. And what is the book going to be about? It's going to be about what you said, which is, how do you reinvent? How do you try something new? And kind of the answer is, go into that place where you're not as comfortable and apply these things that we just talked about: discipline, effort, and will. And guess what? Good things happen. So that's what I'm doing with writing. Just keep at it every day. It's the same as jump roping: 500 words a day, 10 minutes of jump rope. One's physical, one's intellectual. So I think my advice is, push yourselves into those places where maybe you're not as comfortable, apply the discipline and your will, and good things will happen.
Yeah, great. That's great. And now I look at your blog and it says writer, photographer, and a wannabe musician. What, no Frisbee at all in that. No Frisbee, no managing director, none of that. So you are rebranding, you're reinventing yourself even at 29.
At 29, yeah, and I do The Moth. I don't know if you're familiar with The Moth, which is a radio show where you tell stories. So
No.
it's a, it's basically Story Slam, and I also do that. Um, and those are all new and different. And Once Upon a Time, Ultimate was new and different. And we had this wonderful career. You've had it, I've had it. So what's next? And I think those lessons you described can be applied and quiet that negative voice that might be saying, I'm not sure you can do that. Well, we've
Yeah.
proven we can.
Well,
Well,
thank you so
awesome.
much, Steve. This has been really great. To those, listening, again, Steve, legend of the sport, clearly has a ton of, you probably have a lot more stories to share, I'm sure, but that'll have to be for another time. But thank you so much. Thank you for your commitment to the sport. Thank you for, the work you do at Ultimate Impact, the work you've done at USA Ultimate, Ultimate Peace, and you've had a profound impact on the game. And this has been a fun conversation. Uh, we'll have to talk again. Not now that we know each other.
I'll look forward to it. And thanks for reaching out and making it possible. And I'll look forward to our next conversation.